You know, the public domain is hilarious when you think about it. After enough time goes by, even the most out there fan fiction can be considered canon just because no one can stop you. Just look at everything Cthulhu's been up to in recent years. Not just him, but also Sherlock Holmes, Victor Frankenstein, Dracula, Alice in Wonderland, all your beloved non-copyright infringing favorites. Do you want the Count of Monte Cristo to be an epic sci-fi revenge story where the Count himself is a ridiculously charismatic vampire? Well, you can do that. But it already exists, and it's called Gankutsuo, so go watch that. Heck, if you want, you could make a canonical descendant or superpowered ghost of your favorite old school character, and not even bother paying anyone for the privilege. It's fantastic. Such is the case with Arsène Lupin, originally depicted in a series of novels by Maurice Leblanc. He's a legendary gentleman master thief whose escapades were wildly popular in France during the turn of the 20th century. Ever since, not only has he been an inspiration for other writers and characters, he's been directly referenced and homaged in countless works. He's even crossed over with Sherlock Holmes once. Until Arthur Conan Doyle got huffy and made him change the name, but he certainly can't do that now, since, you know, he's dead. Loser. One such aspect of Lupin's legacy is the long-running franchise Lupin III, whose name has been slapped onto an absurd amount of merchandise since he hit the scene over 50 years ago. And since I don't really know anything about this series, I invited the best Lupin III expert there is. But he didn't reply to my emails, so here's Cloud Connection instead.
Hey, that's me. So, you want to know about Lupin III, huh? Let me tell you all about him. So in 1967, manga creator Kazuhiko Kato, writing under the name Monkey Punch, began writing and drawing a series called Lupin III, about its titular thief and his gang of wacky miscreants. He designed his thief as the grandson of Arsène Lupin, carrying on the family name. The manga was extremely successful in Japan, and since 1971, it has received several anime adaptations that have only increased its popularity. Technically, Monkey Punch wrote the manga before Arsène Lupin entered the public domain, and didn't ask for permission from the estate of Maurice Leblanc, which led to a bunch of legal shenanigans that aren't important for this video. Guess he felt how Doyle felt, or he would have if he hadn't, died. Loser. These legal issues aside, the franchise expanded into several other media forms, including, of course, video games.
Such is the case with Treasure of the Sorcerer King, the only Lupin III game to be translated into English outside of 1983's Cliffhanger, but that game is...
The four-way joystick controls the direction of Cliff and the car he recklessly drives.
Yeah, that. Now, licensed games are certainly nothing new by 2004, and most of the time they provide for rather horrid results, but with a name as big as Lupin III, surely they'd put in some good effort. I mean, this could be like Anime Sly Cooper by way of Hitman, we just have to give it a chance. Personally, with my utter lack of experience with the franchise, I thought it'd be neat to get the perspective of a superfan like Cloud to help me out. So let's start it up. The game opens with a pre-rendered cinematic cutscene showing a quiet city street at night before Lupin bursts out of a window with a handful of his latest haul. It shows off each character of the gang in action, with Jigen shooting someone behind a door and Goemon cutting a bridge in half. Okay, Jigen, you're not so impressive now, unless you can shoot a bridge in half as well. Oh, you can shoot a helicopter? How cute. I have to admit, even not being a fan of this series, seeing all these wacky events going on does make me interested in playing the game. I mean, surely they wouldn't show this stuff off if it wasn't in the game, right? Right?
Don't worry, I'm sure we'll get to cut something in half real soon. So we start the game proper with this young girl Teresa waiting to board a train alongside some priceless artifacts, including this statue of Lupin III. Wait a minute. Well, you know immediately once you see the statue's face move what the deal is if you're a Lupin fan. But for non-fans, this cutscene lays out the basics. Lupin's a thief on the hunt for treasure, and Inspector Zenigata here is hot on his trail. Teresa and this headless Smiles Edgeworth apparently have some valuable cargo on board. So once this statue's on the train, big shock, it's actually Lupin, and our first mission is making it up through the train cars to reach the loot.
I guess you could call this the training level of the game.
Why did I agree to this?
Lupin III is a stealth game. They were going to make it a real-time strategy game, but I guess that was a bit too much to ask of. Makes perfect sense for a game about a master thief, and nearly everything you need to know is tutorialized as you go through the first few cars. You can crouch and sneak around to avoid enemy lines of sight, whip out various weapons in case you do get caught, pull around furniture to retrieve items, utilize special gadgets like infrared goggles, and collect clues for solving puzzles, typically in the form of door codes.
One of your chief methods for stealth is disguising yourself, a Lupin staple that makes for a great mechanic. On paper, anyway. Now, posing as somebody else is one of Lupin's most famous tricks. He can pull it off flawlessly and transform himself into anybody, as shown in the intro cutscene. This guard here, that's Lupin. That Inspector Zenigata running around, that's Lupin. In fact, I might even be Lupin.
So, are you Lupin?
No.
That sounds like something Lupin would say.
But the thing is, this game only half translates this concept. You'll pick up a few sets of clothes which let you hide your identity, but it's missing a crucial element. Lupin doesn't change his face. And if you know the series, you know that Lupin and the gang can transform their faces and voices flawlessly. That's part of what makes their disguises work well. But here, Lupin is half-hearting what should be old hat. Amazing these guards don't call you out on sight.
You'd think they'd recognize the international super thief with trademark sideburns, but the power of a low-brimmed hat makes all the difference. See, while you're in disguise, your UI changes your minimap to a mind meter, whatever that's supposed to mean, that displays the nearest guard's current awareness of Lupin's identity. To keep them from finding you out, you need to watch for whenever this exclamation point appears on the meter. This lets you know when to perform the disguise action, a quick little animation to avoid suspicion and give you the chance to pick some pockets. Here's a tip to all aspiring thieves out there: just steal a police uniform, and if anyone questions you, salute them for less than a second. They won't try to shoot you, and you can then steal the Fujiko trading card they have in their pocket. Wait, why did you have that? Later on in the game, you unlock more costumes like a SWAT outfit, a tuxedo, and even Zenigata's spare clothes, which is only used like once, and they don't even change Lupin's character model to Zenigata's, which probably would have been more accurate, but you know, whatever. Now, what happens if you fail these little checks and get your cover blown? Well, if you mess up enough times for the meter to shift from green to red and finally white, the nearest guards will realize you're Lupin and force an escape sequence. To go back into stealth mode, you just have to knock any aware guards unconscious and slip back into your disguise, then the guards will wake up as if nothing happened. Fortunately, your default weapon is a sleep gas gun, so it shouldn't take too long to escape if you're caught. And if that's not enough, you can even find a frying pan in the kitchen. And it's yours. For the rest of the game. Lupin, I'm starting to question your credentials as the world's greatest thief. Surely you have the money to buy a frying pan.
Actually, considering Lupin loses 99% of the treasures he steals, either because someone else steals it right back from him, or the treasure ends up being worthless, or just because the plot demands it, it's no wonder why the man needs to source all of this high-tech equipment. And let's be real, that's a high-quality frying pan, taking down guards in just a few whacks. Order your own today for just 4 easy payments of $29.99 plus shipping.
There are even escape sequences triggered by room-specific challenges, like tripping alarm lasers. But so long as you're quick to respond, these moments won't last long and you can get back to solving the great puzzles offered in this chapter.
The basic flow of these levels is finding a scrap of paper that lays out a puzzle solution, and then finding the right panel that lets you input said solution. The tasks in this first chapter are pretty simple. The code for the first door, for example, is quite literally spelled out for you, but they gradually require more brain power. All the ones on the train are, at least for me, fairly rudimentary, but later levels get pretty abstract and require some lateral thinking. I imagine the puzzle masters out there won't struggle too much with them, but it's a fair enough challenge for everyone else, I suppose. Where it can get a little screwy are on the logic-oriented puzzles, like this globe puzzle for instance. You've got to flip these switches in the right order to open up the globe, and rather than giving you a code to decipher, you're just copying the image provided to you. It's not taxing, it's just tedious.
Well hey, at least the final train car puzzle is pretty good. You need to use a hint relating to this panel of color switches to unlock the statues surrounding a glass case. Then you need to push the right statues to the respective panels on the floor. It isn't too taxing, and it makes use of the simple mechanics available to Lupin to nab a gold pitcher, which turns out to be fake. Master Thief.
Well, Lupin manages to escape the train with the fake treasure in tow, and we get the reveal of that headless man from earlier who... Yep, that's obviously the bad guy. Now, while the train was essentially a long hallway, the rest of the game's maps are more open, with more interconnecting sections and branching paths. The town of Golden Goss, for instance, has a couple of areas to roam around in. Not too much to explore, but it's far less cramped than the train. So after that lengthy intro stage, we get a chapter scouting out the castle where the remainder of the game will be taking place, followed by a short segment where you get to play as either Goemon or Jigen.
I chose to play as Jigen, the deep-voiced sharpshooter of the team.
Let's see now, where the hell should I start?
Wait, that sounds familiar.
You're stronger than I expected. You're more robust than you look.
Keith Griff, what are you doing here? Aisha isn't for 6 more games. Lupin's pals actually play in totally different ways to him. Instead of focusing on stealth, these two are all about action. Their sections tend to be very short stretches filled with enemies and capped off with the same trio of mercenaries as boss fights. Apparently, both Jigen and Goemon know who they are. Do you know who they are, Cloud?
I haven't the foggiest. As far as I'm aware, they're unique to this game.
Since Jigen is the firearm specialist, his only weapon is a pistol and the unlimited amounts of ammo he keeps in his back pocket. To attack, you just switch to aiming stance and hit the square button, with a little dodge roll for defense. Also, if you go into first person, it turns your revolver into an SMG.
Meanwhile, I played this section as Goemon the Stoic Samurai, voiced by Goku, or rather by Lex Lang. Rather than firearms, Gokumon is only equipped with his Zantetsuken sword, which, in the anime series at least, can cut through anything, except for the 1 or 2 things the show invented that he can't cut through. Like Jigen, Goemon isn't so much about stealth, and it's not just because his sword deflection is like a malfunctioning chainsaw. His sword is powerful and can take down most enemies in a single slice. Obviously, you can't expect the game's environments to be fully cuttable, but the destructible boxes do get sliced in half, which is a nice touch. Gotta say though, the Zantetsuken sword feels pretty dinky to use. The animation looks wonky, and while it does good damage, it feels super unwieldy.
With all that done, Lupin has declared his challenge to steal the real pictures, and Teresa is now in cahoots with the crew to help with the heist. So we begin Chapter 3. And everything just kind of starts falling apart, like frosting on a still warm cake. See, the chapters until now have been in smaller areas with clues close to each solution, using the disguises to sneak by guards and nab items. Even in the previous chapter where Lupin sneaks in to scope out the castle, things flowed pretty well because you only have a small section to search. But now, we have the entire flipping castle to walk around, and all the game's problems start rearing their ugly heads. Everything we described in the previous section about the gameplay? Yeah, they sound nice on paper, but paper is a flimsy thing that doesn't do a good job holding up hopes and dreams. First off, the stealth in this stealth game is super janky. Oops. When you're sneaking around guards, searching rooms in disguise, and finding clues to puzzles, you have such a short window for doing disguise actions, it can feel really unfair. Enemies can spot you from the other side of a hallway or from off camera, then give you 1 second to salute them, or they'll lower your stealth meter. And since it takes only 2 mistakes to put you in escape mode, it can feel totally pointless to put the disguise back on at all. Why bother wasting my time trying to convince them I'm a guard when I can just strip back to my red jacket and hit them with my frying pan?
But by contrast, while they can spot you from miles away, these enemies have the worst time actually chasing you. They can corner you somewhat effectively if they get close enough, but if you do something as simple as close a door behind you or walk around a wall, they'll just lose the trail instantly. It's like they hired a bunch of ostriches. They have no object permanence, and that is true of every single enemy, even poor old Zenigata. Doesn't help that they repeat the same voice lines over and over. Yes, you must have been dreaming, you and every other dang guard in this castle. Although all these guards look the same, even the ones that are quote-unquote Lupin experts that are never fooled by your disguise. And since you can't tell these ones apart, figuring out which ones are instant stealth breakers is just a guessing game. So that's a feature that just makes stealth totally pointless.
Speaking of pointless, pickpocketing is such a useless feature. After you use a disguise action, you have a very brief window to walk up to a guard and try stealing an item. Problem is, the window for a successful pickpocketing is even shorter than the disguise action. You have to be close enough to make out with them, and you have maybe half a second to land the timing or take another hit to stealth. I can't tell you how many times I thought I got the timing correct and still failed, causing me to get caught, beat them unconscious, and then slip my costume back on. And why can't I pick their pockets while they're unconscious? Did their pockets phase out of existence from the sheer power of my frying pan? Order now and receive a second one for absolutely free? Oh wait, it doesn't matter because pickpocketing is totally pointless. You never need to do it to progress. Most of them are just carrying useless trinkets, and the best you can get out of them is a health item or an extra life. So that's another mechanic that just isn't worth utilizing or is too lackluster to really be fun.
I'm surprised these guards are as good at noticing you reach into their pockets as they are, considering how dumb they behave otherwise. I mean, if you perform all the stealth checks perfectly, all they're doing is looking at you, going, "What is it?" and then stretching and yawning a whole bunch, or even running into walls if they're feeling particularly ambitious. Rinse and repeat until you're out of their line of sight. So these guards manage to simultaneously be hyper-intelligent and dumb as bricks, with no in-between whatsoever. And despite supposedly having sound detection, guards won't notice alerts happening in the room right beside them.
Hey everyone, Lupin, the super famous master thief, is in this very room. He was dressed as one of us, but I found him out, and now he's ours for the taking. I just need some back.
Did you hear something just now? Probably my imagination. Back to standing around aimlessly.
What makes it even worse is how massive this level is. Chapter 3 probably took up nearly half my playtime because it has several floors that each have different hallways and multiple rooms that don't often contain anything important. And since the whole castle looks very similar throughout, I found it really easy to get lost and lose the place of locations I need to revisit. Not helping this is the fact that you're spending the vast majority of this level in a disguise, which disables your mini-map. Who thought that was a good idea? I bet they're the kind of person to shut off their GPS when they put on sunglasses.
And also, this is a minor problem with Chapter 3, but the first part recycles the map from Chapter 2, which you literally just went through. Sure, you take a different route, and the locked doors have different combinations, but you are still going through the same hallways as the previous mission.
Another big problem with this level is how obtuse the puzzle solutions can get. Some of them are okay. I really like the one where you have to interpret patterns on a blank keypad for the code, but most of the others remind me of old Sierra adventure games. You know, the kind where you'd ring up a fortune calling the helpline because you couldn't figure out the name of Ifankov Grogperm. No, you can't enter this room yet. You need to find a riot guard outfit and access the 3rd floor where you pick up this itty bitty teeny tiny keycard in the same room as the captain of the guard, then follow a strange woman down the hallway, no we won't show you the same camera angle, and then enter a completely unmarked door among a hallway full of the same unmarked doors, and then go back to an entirely different floor with the one unique door. Then you can enter the room. What, you couldn't figure that out, you monkey? And then you have to do this dumb minigame because Fujiko apparently gave you a fake key card.
Someone remind me why I keep trusting this woman.
Well, Lupin, I can think of at least 2 reasons you might have. Do you think Lupin has a Fujiko disguise for when he gets lonely?
I can tell you as a matter of fact that he does. Speaking of Fujiko's lovely personalities, I want to commend this game for representing the series really well. I obviously can't speak to the original Japanese script, but it does feel very much like an episode from the anime series, Part 2 specifically, just elongated to a 7 to 9 hour runtime. The staple elements from the series are all accounted for, the gang all acting like the gang, the MacGuffin of the week that Lupin's after, the sidekick of the week who wants to help the gang find what they're after, and a not at all subtle bad guy who stands in their way. All pat and parcel stuff, and honestly, I wasn't expecting anything more than that. Now, where you might be able to fault it is not being entertaining to a non-fan, as because it, for the most part, sticks pretty close to the standard Lupin fare, it might not win over anyone who's not already a Lupin convert.
Speaking as someone who isn't in the Lupin cult, I think the characters were pretty enjoyable for what little they actually get to say to one another. Honestly, I kind of wish there were more cutscenes between the crew and less between Lupin and the game's exclusive characters, because their banter was fun. Like when Fujiko was flirting with Lupin to take his card, or Goemon and Jigen's chat later in the game. Theodore and Teresa are fine, I guess, but they just kind of feel there. Like they need to be there for the plot to happen and nothing beyond that. And obviously evil bad guy and a damsel in distress wanting to help our hero for reasons to be explained later.
That happens a lot in Lupin, honestly.
Well, I guess it is accurate then. Shame the concept doesn't translate from a TV show or movie into a 9-hour game. If there's anything in this game that might sell me, a non-fan on the franchise, it's the soundtrack. This game has some of the best video game jazz I've ever heard, to the point I dislike the escape sequences even more. When you get caught, the best song in the game starts playing.
What is it?
But since it takes maybe 5 seconds to go back into stealth, I never get to hear much of it. The opening theme, the stealth song, the ambient backing tracks, most of them are great songs that make it feel much more like a high-stakes heist mission, even though when you get caught, it would be more fitting to play this.
I agree on the soundtrack, it's great stuff, although that's not surprising given that Lupin series composer Yuji Ono did the music for this as well. Visually, the game doesn't look half bad for a PS2 game. The models for the main characters, at least, are pretty spot on. They're the best 3D interpretations of the gang until the first came around and made Jigen unnecessarily sexy. Although it is super jarring to see the gang in a somewhat cartoonish art style juxtaposed with Teresa and Theodore, who look like generic PS2 models, and the guards all look like the same lower poly model copy-pasted. And I gotta say, the voice acting threw me off a bit. It uses the same cast from Part 2's English dub, who are normally a great crew. This could just be me, but I noticed that the main voice actors sound a little flat compared to their normal body of work. They would have recorded their lines well after Part 2's dub was prematurely finished, so they might have been away from the characters for a while, and besides, this is a video game, so not exactly the most important project for the series. Still, Richard Epcar and Lex Lang especially feel a bit sleepy, and Tony Oliver is doing his darndest, but the script doesn't let him seriously emote like he can in the show, which means the dramatic sections in the later half of the game don't land as well as they should. Spoilers for the second half of the game coming up. Skip to the time on screen if you don't want to hear them.
In the second half of the game, after stealing the sacred pictures of King Solomon, you find an underground magic cult known as Ravencrows. Beneath the ancient castle is an even ancienter castle housing the long-lost knowledge of alchemy. By the way, have you heard about Atelier? Remember all that neato stealth that isn't really all that great, but was at least vaguely interesting? Well, just forget about it, because the rest of this game has you running around an underground maze as you shoot monsters and living statues. Then you meet a 400-year-old alchemist who's just happy someone came to visit him for once and gives Lupin a bag of magic gold bullets that can shoot anything, despite gold being a very soft metal. I guess is where the magic comes in. After quite a bit more creature killing, maze wandering, you find a battered and tortured Fujiko who gives you Teresa's pendant. Once we hand her off to the alchemist for healing, we head off to confront Theodore, who's holding Teresa as a hostage for the pendant. What? He's the villain? Okay, so Theodore leads the Ravencrows organization and killed Teresa's dad to get information on the ancient civilization's alchemy knowledge so he can take over the world, I guess? After activating the controls of a colossal ancient robot, Goemon cuts fire, so I guess Jigen really isn't all that impressive, and Jigen uses a gold bullet to shoot Theodore, but he didn't shoot fire, so who cares? But with him out of the picture, we must now combat the giant culmination of the ancient world's technology, leading to a boss fight of epic proportions, calling upon all your skills and tactics to... So, yeah. Magic. Does this happen a lot in Lupin? Like how Professor Layton always fights a giant robot?
Kinda. So it's not unheard of for supernatural things to occur in this series, but a lot of the unbelievable stuff that happens is more, I suppose, grounded in a reality. Like the gang does tend to do stuff that bends the laws of physics as we understand them, but as far as actual crazy magic stuff, that's a little more rare. This stuff with the giant golem and Theodore shooting fire out of his hands is very obviously magic, which is not the direction the series typically goes for. So while this isn't a huge departure from the series itself, it is strange that this game ended up going for this route rather than be a little more traditional. I guess they just wanted to make an ending that had the proper spectacle? Anyway, you blast this big golem a bunch of times and it's time to escape the cave, but not before the actual final boss against this horrifying thing. I guess Theodore fused himself with one of the rock monsters via magic, and the end result is absolutely disgusting. Eldritch abominations like this aren't common in the series, and genuinely, this might be the scariest thing I have ever seen from Lupin III. Look at that unhinged jaw! It's like Dead Hand from Ocarina of Time and Nylon from Half-Life had a horrible, terrible baby. The fight itself is kind of boring, just a bunch of moving and lining up your shot, but it's at least memorable because of how nightmare-inducing it is.
Hey, if you want to see some really scary monsters, stick around for October. With all of that taken care of, the castle explodes and we see Teresa at the train station where the game started. She speaks with Zenigata, who admits Lupin wouldn't die from an explosion, and she meets with him on the train as he returns her father's notebook. Then, with a big bag of gold for their troubles, they ride off in—
Wait, what happened to Fujiko? We left her behind in the castle with the alchemist. Are we sure she's okay?
I'm sorry, did you miss the big bag of gold we have in the car? Forget her, we got money! And that's Lupin III, treasure of the Sorcerer King. Sadly, I can't make the pun how it's a diamond in the rough, or even a $10 bill in the sand. It has so many cool ideas that would have made for a great stealth game if executed well, and none of it really worked out. The disguises make sense, but the overall stealth is lackluster even with its inclusion. Pickpocketing was a cool idea, but actually using it is more trouble than it's worth. Getting to play as different characters could have been neat if their gameplay wasn't so basic. Speaking as someone whose knowledge of Lupin III is on par with the average person's experience with advanced deep sea exploration, there were only a handful of moments I enjoyed. Some of the puzzles are cool, I liked the gang interacting with one another, but going through the levels was way too clunky for me, so I can't say I recommend it for people who aren't already fans of the franchise.
I found that Treasure of the Sorcerer King matched my expectations pretty well. I thought it'd be a fairly generic PS2 stealth action game, and that's exactly what it was. It's a solid enough story, and the gang is mostly faithful to the series, so it works on that front. As a game, it's not super fun thanks to some wonky design and a bloated middle section, but I guess it could have been worse.
I mean, yeah, everything can be worse. It could have summoned Lupin into my house to steal my games. Wait a second.